everyone and welcome. Hey Heidi, she's wanting to say hello. She thinks I'm talking to her. Anyways, welcome to the studio. I am going to do a demo for you today, kind of a step-by-step of a close-up of some daisies. Now, if you saw the video from the other day, I demonstrated for you how to paint a single daisy using your artist brain rather than your intellectual or thinking brain, and how we see symbols or shortcuts, and we really need to override that information. So this is the result of that particular painting that I did for you earlier. So what I want to do is kind of put it all together and show you how this fits in to a larger painting. And the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this guy. So I'm going to take a piece of the pipe insulation foam and kind of just smoosh it into the paper. Now that daisy will probably become a part of the painting, but it'll be underneath all the other things, okay? And I am also working on a recycled piece of paper. It was a painting that was not very successful, so I brushed it out and I sprayed it with a little bit of the workable fixative that I like to use, Blair. We'll let that dry for just a second. While that dries, I want to talk about what I did for the thumbnail, and I gave it a name, the painting, called it Emergence, because what I like about my scene, let me show you the reference photo a little bit closer. Right here. What I like about this scene is how these daisies seem to be kind of emerging to the sun. They're like reaching for the sun, and in my mind that's what's happening there. And I've painted these particular daisies several times because every time I do them they come out a little bit different because I rearranged them in different ways. So basically on my thumbnail I've left room for the larger daisies, and I'm going to paint a dark shape behind the daisies, and that is to hold them into place. Because if I didn't put a dark shape to begin the painting, those flowers might look like they're just floating, and I want to look like they're being held into the ground by their stems and by the grasses and by the dirt that's underneath. So this is what I have for my thumbnail, and I'm going to just clip it up here, and then I've got my photo over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw in my design, and I'm going to use just a piece of new pastel, and I'm going to start with, I guess this guy can be right there, but it's not going to be as big. And then I got a little one over here, and I've got one over here, and one over here, and I like the one sneaking off the corner, and then maybe one hidden, and then these are the shadowed areas. I got to be careful that this one is not directly in the middle, so I think I have to remember to keep it off center just a little bit. Now you might be wondering, why am I drawing big circles instead of drawing flowers? Well, I'm drawing big circles because I want to paint the petals with the side of my pastel. And if I were to draw in the individual petals, I would tend to want to color them in rather than painting them. So I'm just putting circles where I want those flower shapes to be. And then I will come in and paint them. But I don't need a precise drawing to color in because, like I say, I'm not painting, I'm more coloring in the lines, and I don't want to do it that way. So that's where the flowers are going to go. So the first thing I want to do is create that dark shape that I talked about. And I'm going to use, so I would call it a middle dark value blue pastel. I'm going to sneak it up around these flowers that I've established. Not everywhere, just kind of going up and around to support the flowers. I'm going to add another layer, so I'm using a light touch so I can get another layer of pastel. And by the way, this is a piece of sanded pastel paper. It happens to be Wallace Warm Mist that I had kind of in a leftover stash, but it's sanded paper. Now I'm going to go with another dark value. This one is going to be a dark kind of rusty color. And because I've used a light touch, you can still see all of those dark colors together, and they kind of play together and make a nice, interesting, rich background. Then I have to say, okay, I got to remind, excuse me, I want to remind myself, where is the sunlight coming from? And in this case, I'm going to have the sun coming from over on the left, so I'll draw a little yellow circle to indicate the sunlight. That way I can remember to stay on top of where the sun is going to be. And so what I'm going to do is, in this shadow area, I'm going to put in a kind of a blue-green, just to remind me that that's shadow, and then a darker value blue-green down here to remind me that these are dark shadowed areas. And then I'm going to put in some dirt, and that is going to be what's good. There's a lot of green in here, so let me step back and explain what I'm talking about. There's a lot of green with the grasses and the stems and the leaves and all of this that supports these flowers. But if I just went ahead and painted with just green, it might be just a little bit boring. So what I want to do is establish some other colors underneath the green. So what is going to go good with all of this yellow? The complement of yellow, which is violet. So I'm going to go ahead with a kind of a middle value mauve-y violet as my dirt color. What is this one? Ooh, this is a little bit like more of a red violet. Red violet. When we talk about color in March, we'll talk more about making these color choices, and a lot of times they get to become intuitive, but they only become intuitive because you've studied them. So, you know, if you feel like, I would never know what color to pick, don't worry about it. You will get there. It's just, you know, it's just a lot of study and work, and then all of a sudden it clicks and you're like, oh, okay, I don't have to even think about that. All right, now I want to paint some of the flowers that are underneath, because if I look carefully, I see some shapes that are underneath the grasses. And so in the shadow, I'm going to just take a kind of a middle value blue, and I'm making some small little shapes that are supposed to stand in as flowers that are going to be buried under the grass. And the reason why I'm doing it right now is because I'm going to put grass on top, and it'll be harder to put these flowers on top of the grass. Then they won't look like they're buried. So you've got to kind of step back and say, all right, these flowers, even though they're the most important thing, I have to paint them last, and I have to paint what's underneath first. So you paint what's underneath and you build to what comes on top. So you kind of have to plan ahead that way. Now I think I'm ready to start with the flowers, and I always like to start with the centers of the flowers first. And I'm going to start with the darker blue. You know, in pastel we want to start and paint from dark to light. So I'm going to start with the darkest color that I want. I'm going to actually put in some centers of flowers that I don't even see, just so that we can, some of these guys that I just put in, and that'll just help bury them. Then I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit of that purple, and there's a couple reasons why I'm putting in the purple again. One of the reasons is I want to carry the colors throughout. So if I'm using purple kind of as the dirt color, it would be nice if the flowers themselves had a little bit of purple on them as well. And then if I'm looking, and I want to really pay attention to what I see rather than what my brain is trying to tell me, because my brain is trying to tell me that it should look just like that. But I'm looking at it and I say, wait a minute, it really doesn't look like that. It's got purple in it. It's got kind of a yellow-green in it. And I'm talking about the centers of the flowers here. So I'm trying to override what my brain wants to have me paint and paint what I'm actually observing. So I'm adding some of the colors that I'm seeing in the actual flowers themselves. And then they do, actually they have, where's that little yellow green guy? There he is. I'm going to put some of that yellow green. I'm using the side of my pastel, and you could probably wondering, well, what kind of mark am I using? I'm using a shouting mark. I'm pressing actually pretty hard. And the reason why I'm pressing hard is because I know I'm probably not going to put too many more layers on top of this. I'm going to put a little bit of warm yellow, and I'm shouting. I'm pressing very hard. A little bit of, oops, that's a little bit too fat. A little bit of warm yellow, and then a little bit of cool yellow. And I like to mix the warm yellow and the cool yellow together when I paint these centers, because it just makes them come alive a little bit more. So what's a warm yellow? What's a cool yellow? Think a lemon yellow, like a lemon, is more of a cooler yellow, and an orangey yellow, like a sun, is more of a, let me make a mark here, maybe you can see that. It's a lemony yellow, that would be considered a cool yellow. And that's an orangey yellow, and that's a warmer yellow. And what I'm trying to do is mix both of them within these centers, and that seems to make them come alive a little bit more. And then finally I'm going to take my darkest dark, and on some of the centers I'm going to just kind of ground them before I start to paint the petals. So it might seem weird to paint the centers of the flowers before you even paint the flowers, but it's just a good way to establish where their placement is, and I don't know, it just seems to work out nicely that way. Now I'll paint some petals. Actually, before I paint petals, I'm going to go ahead and start in with some of the green. So I'm going to take a green and start to go over some of this dirt color using the side of the pastel. Now, that's in the shadow area, so I want to keep it kind of a cooler, duller green. And where the sunlight is hitting, I want to make it a warmer green, a more yellowy green. This is more of a grass green. Now I'm not painting small little details right now. I'm painting just big areas or swaths of green. And I want to finish it. I just want to establish it just a little bit before I put in the petals. Now I'm going to put in the petals. And I'm going to start with the petals by starting with the darkest color I see, and that is the shadow petals. The shadowed petals, and I'm using blue for the petals that are in the shadow.
Shapes.
What?
Shapes.
The petal shapes. And there's the original guy that I had. I'm going to just reestablish him. And I'm looking at my photo just for a reminder of how I can paint these petal shapes to look more realistic, or what they really look like, and not what my brain is telling me. And what I'm seeing is I'm seeing that they kind of radiate from the center, but not all the way around, except for a few. Like this particular guy has, you can see the petals that are in the back, and this one here at the bottom you can see the smaller petals that are behind the center, and it's going right off the page. There's another guy. Now they seem weird, right? They seem like, well, they're blue. They look like maybe blue flowers instead of daisies. But the next part is to actually turn on the lights, or make them lighter and brighter. So I'm going to go ahead with a pale yellow on top of the blue. And I'm not using white, because white is my highlight. White is going to be the lightest color that I'm going to use. So I really want to reserve it for where it's going to have the most impact. So wherever I look at my reference photo where I see that the petals are coming into the light, I'm using this pale yellow. And where they are remaining in the shadow, I'm leaving them pale blue. So this way we kind of get the feeling of where they're coming into the light, where the light is and where the shadow is. And this is where sometimes when you're painting you've got to say, well, I really need something here because it's just like they're all in the center, and maybe I need something back over here just to hint at that they're going off the page, and definitely over here. So this is where you want to do some rearranging. Are these two much the same, this guy and this guy? I'm thinking maybe they are. So how do I change that? I'm going to make this one bigger. So when you're painting on your own, you want to step back frequently so that you can evaluate the shapes and the sizes and the placement of your shapes, so that you can make sure that they're in an interesting arrangement and that they're not too symmetrical. Because that's another thing that our intellectual or thinking brain wants to do. It wants to put things in order. It wants to line things up. It wants to make spaces equal. All right, now where are we on this painting? We are getting to the finish. We've got our flowers in place. We've got the feeling of light on the petals. And I was talking about using the white. And I want to reserve the pure white for where we're going to look. So let's just say if we come in the painting on this flower and we want to jump up to this flower, I'll put some pure white on the petals only where I really want your eye to go, and then this petal right here. And I'm really pressing hard. When I say shout, I'm shouting with this, and then maybe this guy right here. And then by having these really pure white only in a few places, it makes it stand out. Again, these are the highlights, and then these darker areas are the accents. And that really allows those petals to pop. If we use pure white everywhere, it'd be nowhere. It would not be as interesting. So reserve it for where you want the eye to look. All right, now let's finish up the painting. And that is, sometimes I press so hard they just explode. Then I know I'm really doing a good job. All right, so now what we want to do, I'm going to remove some of that pastel. I'm using a steel push pin. If you saw in the other video, you can use a steel push pin to remove pastel, kind of like scratch art, and it really allows you to kind of fine tune an area and create those veins on the petals. You get these steel push pins at any office supply store or online. You don't want to put them everywhere because it's easy to get carried away with it as a technique. All right, let's work on the green. So if we've got light coming in, then we want to add some feeling of light in our greenery. So I'm using a yellow green, kind of a middle value, light middle value yellow green, to kind of sneak in and create some kind of sunlit areas in our greenery. And then before we go too much further, I think what we need to do is establish some stems, and we don't want to have balloons. And so if we make our stems too straight and too even, they could very easily look like a string of balloons or a bunch of balloons. So I'm going to take a middle value green and just kind of let it dance on the paper so that I can have some stems that look more painterly and more natural and believable than if I just made them straight and regular. And then those stems, some of them would be catching some light on the left-hand side, so I'm using a lighter kind of yellow-green on the edge. This happens to be a unison pastel, which has a nice rounded edge, which really allows me to go in and kind of use the edge of it to create a feeling of light on some of those stems. This guy needs a little bit of light where it's poking into the sun. Alright, and now we need some leaves, so we'll go in with another green, and I'm going to just, because I've got everything going up and down vertical marks, I need to have some horizontal marks now. So I'm going to go in there, and I'm not going to be precise about where I put those leaves. You know, in other words, I don't want it to look like our thinking brain flower. I just want to kind of put in a few horizontal marks to indicate possible leaf shapes. And what I want to happen is to have there be a suggestion of the dark underneath, and now I'm getting lighter and brighter and more detailed with my marks. And I'm just going in and putting in, I'm going to use a darker green, and put some other leaf shapes that happen to be a little bit darker, so that they can look like they're kind of buried or underneath. I want lots of different layers. That's what I'm searching for or attempting here, is to have layers. And then finally, and you could get carried away with this. Really, you could go on, and then before you know it, you've got too much going on. But the final marks that I'm going to make, got this wonderful little turquoise, and I'm going to come in and put some grass marks. I'm going to use the turquoise because it's a cooler color in the shadow areas. Remember, I want the cooler colors in the shadow areas. And this is a new pastel, so I can get some nice linear marks.